A few days ago, we saw the reveal of the next Call of Duty game called Modern Warfare. And yet, one of the biggest pieces of information regarding the game and one of the most celebrated talking points was the support of cross-platform play. What does that mean? Well, it means that players across different platforms will be able to play games together, so PC with Xbox or PS4 with PC, even maybe PS4 with Xbox, the two main console competitors having players from both systems playing together. Let's start by saying that exactly how cross-platform play will be integrated into the new Call of Duty has not yet been confirmed. Infinity Ward have explained its existence, but not in what modes it will be available, and haven't really gone into specifics. It could in theory only be limited to co-op and not multiplayer. We can't be sure. And this announcement has definitely sent waves across the gaming scene. Fortnite has done this already. Pretty much any system can play with any other system, but for Call of Duty to do it, it's a pretty big deal. But it brings up some really interesting talking points. For me, namely, is it time for Battlefield to be a cross-platform title? Bear with me for a second and let's look at how Fortnite does this, because it's fair to say that Sony really doesn't permit this kind of thing very often, and only a few games actually allow this. And it has to be said that it took a long time to get to this stage. But I do think that the idea of cross-platform in general is becoming much more reasonable and acceptable to the big publishers. So with Fortnite, players can play with other platforms across PC, mobile, Mac, PS4, Xbox, even the Switch. And if you're a regular gamer, this straight away might have alarm bells ringing in your head, and you'll be thinking, wait, I don't really want to load up my game on PlayStation 4 and end up playing against people on PC with mouse and keyboard. And that's where the magic happens. If you want to play against PC players on Fortnite and you're on console, you have to opt into it. If you would rather only be matched with other console users, then that's fine. If, however, you want to play with friends, and let's say one of those friends is on PC, and you accept the fact that you will be put into a PC lobby because you've got at least one PC player present in your group. Likewise, I'd also make sure that if you're using a mouse and keyboard on console, you'd be put into a PC lobby too. And that's the way that Fortnite works. The idea is simple. If you're playing on console but you've got friends on PC, you can still play together, but you're not just matched against PC players when you load up a multiplayer game on your own. The idea of this is simple. If you're playing on console but you've got friends on PC, you can still play together, but you're not just matched against PC players when you load up on a multiplayer game on your own. It's really giving you the option of playing cross-platform when and if you needed or wanted to. Of course, cross-platform between Xbox and PlayStation 4 is far simpler because they're both console games played generally on a controller, at least unless you're one of the few that uses a mouse and keyboard. But I would say that that's in the minority right now, although I've definitely noticed more people using mouse and keyboard on console now. They're kind of officially supporting it. With that in mind, what if cross-platform play was present in Battlefield, whether that's BF5 and it's added, or in the next main title? So I think the same principle would have to apply here. Let's say I wanted to play a few rounds of Conquest and I have myself one friend on PC but my other friend is on Xbox and maybe I'm playing on PlayStation. We could all then create a party and play together in the same server. If it worked the same as Fortnite though, those two console players would be accepting of the fact that they'd be up against PC players. That's the caveat, I suppose, of this sort of system. And I think this would be great as well for any co-op modes. Of course, BF5 does have a co-op mode in Combined Arms, and although it's not all that popular, something like this would arguably be even better in a non-competitive environment. The same could be said if a Battlefield game ever had a proper co-op single-player experience. But console to console, PlayStation and Xbox playing together, I think that totally just makes sense and it should be a thing. Now recently Battlefield has had a few playlists removed in the form of Domination and Frontlines. One of the main reasons for that is that there just isn't enough people playing those modes apparently. But perhaps something like this would change that. Imagine if you had the option of pooling all platforms together. All of a sudden it's a massive pool of people who just love Battlefield, and the player base across each mode in the game altogether is now significantly greater. Instead of, let's say, having only 500 people playing Frontlines on one platform and, I don't know, 2,000 on another, and then maybe a further 1,000, you're going to now have 3,500 total in that pool to draw from. Of course, it's not quite that simple, because if a party of PC players wanted to play, they'd still be getting matched against other PC players, and of all the platforms, I'd say that it's the PC one that has the lowest player base. But I think in general, this is a huge leap forward for Call of Duty, and honestly, they could set the benchmark here for cross-platform in AAA shooters if they get it right. They themselves have had some issues recently with certain playlists, so even a huge franchise like COD is not immune to having lower player numbers on certain modes. When it comes to Blackout, they fairly recently removed duos because of lower player numbers, only to re-add it back on console. But if you were able to just combine the PlayStation 4 and Xbox player numbers, that could be a thing of the past. I want to reiterate one thing though, because this is super important. After the announcement about the COD cross-platform thing, I did see a lot of people saying, well, I don't want to play against PC players. And it's important to note that in this scenario, you would never be forced to. It's always opt-in. If cross-platform ever came to Battlefield, in my scenario, console players would only ever be put up against PC players if they had a PC player in their party, and therefore they were willing to play in a PC lobby. At all other times, they'd only ever be playing against their own console or the other console, so Xbox and PlayStation 4 together. In that instance, in my opinion, there's no downside really that I can see to this. Player numbers would be bolstered across the board, and no players would ever be at a disadvantage unless they either wanted to be or were accepting a PC player into their party. So when it comes to Battlefield, we have the obvious player base increase benefits that I've mentioned, but also a big improvement in matchmaking times too. The more players you've got in the pool, the faster you should be able to match between them. And this could have meant that duos in Firestorm, for example, might still be around, even if it was just on console, if the player bases were all merged. Are there any negatives? Well, of course, if you're having different platforms playing each other, the versions of the game, the way they're patched, it's going to have to be pretty accurate. I don't think this would be an issue for Battlefield, as they tend to patch the different platforms at the same time anyway. It does, however, remove any possibility for separate balance between PC and console versions of the game. As with any FPS game, some weapons are just much easier to use on PC. There are, however, guns that an average console player would find a bit harder to control, whereas a PC player with a mouse won't see any issue. And there's been calls for separate balancing for console and PC for some time in Battlefield games. In fact, BF Hardline did go down this route, but if you wanted cross-platform, all platforms would need to be identical in game design for fairness. And while we're on the subject, I'd also love to see progress saved between platforms. I know this doesn't happen very often, and it's probably not an issue for the majority of people, but there are a few people that end up owning 2 copies of the game across different platforms. Maybe they've got different friends who only have an Xbox or a PlayStation. And this definitely happened a lot more with BF1, thanks of course to EA Access. So let's say you play mostly on PC, but on your Xbox you had EA Access, which means that you get access to a vault of games, including Battlefield. Some people would perhaps play PC as their main platform, but maybe one afternoon, or let's say they're away somewhere, they've got their Xbox with them, they want to play some BF5 just on their own or with friends, but sadly they've got to start a character from scratch with no unlocks, and all the progress on their main account won't be increasing. So it would be cool to have cross-platform accounts too, and I'm not sure how much of an issue it would be. Maybe there's some legal implications here, but if cross-platform was introduced, I'd love to see progress carry across between those platforms too. Overall, I think this is a really interesting concept, and I feel that the gaming industry is going in this direction and becoming more inclusive and cross-platform for all of the different systems that you can play games on. And I think it's something that's become a lot more widely accepted recently. If done correctly, no players would ever feel as though they're treated unfairly by the system, and if anything, it should hugely improve the overall player base and matchmaking times. I think it would be really interesting to see if the next Battlefield game was able to put a system like this in place. But is it realistic for a game like Battlefield? I'd love to see this in BF5, and I think maybe between PC and Xbox it may happen, or even PC and PlayStation. But I think this is something that DICE should definitely consider for the next Battlefield game, whenever that may be. By that point in time, let's say 2021, I'm sure that so many games will have cross-platform that it's just the normal thing to do. In the past though, based on reports, it appears that Sony have been the main issue when people want to do cross-platform things in their games, but they did relinquish that with Fortnite recently. But you have to remember, Fortnite is the most popular game in the world, and inevitably it's going to make a ton of money for Sony and open up more revenue possibilities if they go cross-platform. Also, they were the last gaming system to not have it, and people were putting pressure on them, and I guess that they just didn't want to be seen as the bad guy anymore or the odd one out. So you can see why they opened the door for a game like that. For Battlefield, it's nowhere near as big as Fortnite, so what's the likelihood of true cross-platform happening? I'm not sure, but it's something that I would love to see. And that's all for today, folks. Do let me know your thoughts on cross-platform for Battlefield down in the comments below. How would you feel about it? Let me know. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.